Hello, everyone. This is Carlo Grante speaking from the Academy of Merano. I'm speaking also on behalf of the Off the Hook Arts Festival. And with this partnership, we are trying to provide a new perspective in musical understanding from the side of the listener and also of the untrained, uneducated listener. In order to do this, we have to be very, very respectful of the intelligence of the listener. So we don't want to water down the meaning of music or making it too easy. Hence, the title Music Explains Itself. It's a tautology, explaining music without simplifying. In the first two lectures, I laid down some very, very fundamental basic principles of music and general introduction of quest for meaning. And the theme in music, what is it? So we've heard some tunes, and we also gave some tools at analyzing and recognizing the theme as a musical structure. So if I do this, and we all recognize this Nokia tune, we can all say it could be a theme or a motive, that a rather short theme, but it could be made of three motives or one motive repeating itself, varying itself. As these lectures progress, we will get more and more tools. We'll learn how to analyze music, even only orally. Then we spoke about form in music as a structure, not a physical structure, a structure that unfolds itself in time, because music is time, sounding time. Music has its own time. How do we perceive this unfolding in time of music and recognize a map? This lecture will focus on a rather critical issue, consonance and dissonance, this dichotomy. There isn't one without the other. And I call them, respectively, Apollo and Dionysus in music. Why? Well, if consonance is a stability and peace, dissonance is movement, is temperament, perhaps, or well, these two archetypes, mythical archetypes, have served us very well when we wanted to represent something rather stable or even classical, is something, the unrest, for example, of romantic aesthetics and feelings. And they will also serve us well in this case. As the terms imply, consonance is rather a musical term because it really means something that sounds okay rather than good. Dissonance, there's a negation there. It sounds as though, well, something is not okay, could be okay. And in fact, we will see that this not being okay, this need for it to be okay, will require the consonance and give dissonance its own role. So let's see. Let's pay due respect to an authoritative source description, the New Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians, of consonance and how it is described.
Consonance. Acoustically, the sympathetic vibration of sound waves of different frequencies related as the ratios of small whole numbers. Psychologically, a harmonious sounding together of two or more notes, that is, with an absence of roughness, relief of tonal tension, or the like. Dissonance is then the antonym to consonance, with corresponding criteria of roughness or tonal tension, and the consonance-dissonance dimension admits of degrees of relative consonance based on either criterion. The roughness criterion, however, implies a psychoacoustic judgment, whereas the notion of relief of tonal tension depends upon a familiarity with the language of Western tonal harmony. There is a further psychological use of the term to denote aesthetic preferences, the criterion generally used being pleasantness or unpleasantness.
Well, roughness, relief of tonal tension, that is very, very important. This tension release or relief are very, very important concepts for us. Of course, consonance has a history.
History. The association of consonants with simple ratios goes back at least to the Pythagoreans of the 5th century BC, who used the term symphonies for intervals produced by string lengths in the ratios formed from numbers between 1 and 4. These comprised the octave, 2 to 1, the fifth, 3 to 2, the octave plus fifth, 3 to 1, the fourth, 4 to 3, and the double octave, 4 to 1. Plato constructed the world soul by harmonizing various ingredients by means of those consonances, and he believed that the planets produced them as they moved in their silent orbits. Aristoxenus dissociated the auditory phenomenon of consonance from numbers and recognized as consonant any interval, besides those named above, produced by adding one or more octaves to a Pythagorean consonance. Though critical of Aristoxenus's purely sensory approach, Ptolemy retained these compounds in his new classification, which embraced homophonic intervals, the octave and its duplicates, symphonic, the fifth and fourth and their combinations with the homophonic, emelic, intervals smaller than the fourth that are used in melody, and ekmelic, intervals not admitted into melody. Boethius, following the Pythagorean Nicomachus, returned to the set produced by the ratios using numbers 1 to 4, but he also reported Ptolemy's opinion that the octave plus fourth was a consonance. Theorists of the early Middle Ages were content to remain faithful to their Boethian tradition, since it did not seriously conflict with the practice of organum. Johannes de Galandia in the 13th century, however, saw that practicing musicians recognized different distinctions. He proposed threefold classifications of consonances and dissonances. Consonances were perfect, unison and octave, imperfect, major and minor thirds, or intermediate, mediae, fourth and fifth. Dissonances were imperfect, major sixth or minor seventh, intermediate, major second and minor sixth, or perfect, minor second, tritone and major seventh. He was followed by, among others, Anonymous the Fourth, who noted that in the west of England thirds were thought to be the best consonances. The minor sixth was admitted among the consonances in the anonymous 14th century Ars Contrapunctus Secundum Philippum de Vitriaco, and both the minor and major sixth in the anonymous Ars Discantus Secundum Johannem de Muris, while the fourths were rejected by them. Walter Oddington first associated, albeit tentatively, major and minor thirds with super-particular ratios, 5 to 4 and 6 to 5, rather than with those of the Pythagorean tuning, 81 to 64 and 32 to 27. But Remus de Pereira, in Musica Practica 1482, was the first theorist to divide the monochord in such a way as to produce these tunings for the imperfect consonances. Geffarius still regarded the imperfect consonances as irrational because he recognized only the Pythagorean tuning. Zarlino, by extending the Pythagorean inner sanctum to the number sixths, was able to admit the ratios 5 to 4, 6 to 5, and 5 to 3, but had to rationalize the minor sixth, 8 to 5, as a composite interval made up of a perfect fourth and a minor third.
Well, you see, humanity has always tried to find a reason, a natural reason for things to be as they are. Here's how a string vibrates. In this case, we see the overtones, the series of overtones, but by the same token, we can divide, shorten a string, and according to these proportions, as we've heard, the scholars, Pythagoras and all others, we can produce consonances, relations that we call consonants. So this justifies and supports also the theory of something that is inborn, an inborn consonance and dissonance. But the interval sixth dissonant, yes, theoretically, then it becomes a theoretical dissonance. Because as all things, as in every language, there is a grammar that assigns a role to processes and to elements. And according to that grammar, the particular grammar of the particular language, that role is not the same for all grammars of our languages. So I mentioned Gombrich and how he associated sloppy mush and crunchy to the fruition of an image. So there's tension and distension, but there's something that involves us, that catches our active attention. We want to turn something that we see into something else, and that else is the same image as we prefer or as we imagine it, for example. In this case, this active participation, expectation, is crunchy. So is Picasso, is Cubism crunchy? The three graces behind the wobbly glass become crunchy? What is the perception of an image, sound image also, that requires this process of recomposition? And why do we want that? This image is all the more interesting because of this wobbly or hammered glass. Or is it not? Does it catch our curiosity? Do we want to recompose? Do we want to imagine the beauty behind it? So beauty is, yes, it is in the eyes of the beholder, but which beholder? And what kind of education has this beholder received? We see this is a typical example of active recomposition of an idealized, of a remembered image. And here, Michelangelo, what did he do? Did he forget to finish this statue, or did he leave it as it is? For us to imagine, to recompose, to create a dissonance. Something is missing? No. Something is there for us to unveil or to recompose, to make it into consonant. And here, oh yes, images are not disassembled, but they're threatened, and yet they're made interesting because these dissonances are attached to the consonants of an image that we know all too well. Dissonance, consonants. So it is obviously easier for a dissonance to suggest its own consonants or a possible consonant, a direction, a destiny. More difficult for a consonant to imagine a dissonance. A consonant, why would it want to move towards a dissonance if not to create that moment of tension that creates the expectation of a relief and release of tension. In fact, we will call resolution those processes in which dissonance is followed by its own relevant consonant. But not all consonances have been the same. Look, for 100 years apart, these two works use consonances and dissonances in rather different ways. Well, does it sound dissonant? No. It sounds okay. But for it to sound okay, there must be moments in which something needs to go somewhere else. And of course, as I said, consonances and dissonances are more than anything else roles. We're speaking about culture, music, school, tradition, and also, we don't love this term, rules that are not rules of thumb, that are not, we shouldn't really feel that we're under rules, but there are procedures that suggest other procedures, and then we call them rules, and perhaps become rules, or at least they rule a style. And now, this is a perfect music, music of angels, some people have dubbed it, music by Palestrina. And that has been, for Western music, that has become a canon of the dialectics of consonants and dissonances that have developed into a more complicated, perhaps, type of dissonance and consonance dialectic. Palestrina is very, very important. This style is for us most important. For the understanding of compositional processes, we cannot do without Palestrina. So how does this music sound? Does it sound okay? Does it have dissonances? Can we believe that such music that angels sing are supposed to sing? We imagine them singing. Can even dare having dissonances? And why? Why would we have dissonance in paradise, in heaven, in nirvana, in a state of absolute peace, beauty, and resolve? Why would we want that? Yes, this music does have dissonances. If anything, we should call them functional dissonances, passing dissonances, momentary dissonances. Something, a sound event becomes momentarily unsettled to settle itself very quickly and very easily and beautifully, to become even more beautiful than before. And this is the palindromic effect also of form in music. We've seen it in the sonata form, want to go back, to return home after a trip of challenges. And if you do not recognize all consonants and dissonances, you do recognize moments in which there is an expectation, and release. And this style has been most influential on the Western musical language. Well, somebody arrived. It was a time in which people loved to write treatises and pulled apart this style in a sort of, should we say, Cartesian way. It really dissected Palestrina styles into smaller elements, or should we say pigeonholes? Yes, rather severely chopped up into pieces. And these pieces are called species. This is the frontispiece of the Gradus ad Parnassum. This really step by step towards the Parnassum, towards the gods, towards mastery. It's written in Latin and it has become very, very, very important, very influential. Not that composers had not written already in a style using this so-called counterpoint, but he set down rules, procedures in a very intriguing way, teacher and pupil speaking. Sometimes that works when one teaches a lesson in form of frequent asked questions, FAQ. Possibly the first famous FAQ in musical teaching that we've had. And here we have a rather simple, I've chosen it for this reason, rather simple tutorial that explains how these pieces work. Even for those who cannot read music, I will try to explain what really is important for the understanding of the roles of consonances and dissonances in music and how we've come to learn it. We, all musicians, have had to do these exercises. That is, one melody, you have one melody, and on top of this melody, you compose a second melody that you call counterpoint, literally, counterpoint, the point being the note. So when we have the first piece is counterpoint, we have really the simplest type of counterpoint. Not that easy, but we have to have consonances. You see these numbers? Those are the distances between the notes that we call intervals. six notes in between. 3, shorter, small, wider. And now it opens up. Sixth, all consonant, all very, very consonant. Bit boring, perhaps? All consonant, beautiful, all consonant. God forbid, put a dissonance, you would not pass the exam. Consonants. And this, of course, that wasn't so good. Could have been better. But no major mistakes. Palestrina would not have written G sharp. We would have called it modal. But this is the same, more modern counterpoint, based on what oh my God, what's happening now? Based on what Fuchs has left us. Well, I let the video go. Let's go back. Now this is 2 notes against 1. More chances, perhaps, for mistakes? Could be. But certainly, how can we have now 2 notes against 1, all consonant with those allowed intervals? Well, when you see those squares around the numbers, that means that is a dissonance. But a dissonance, the dissonance that is allowed, in this case, we call it a passing dissonance, a passing note. So let's see the effect of this passing note. Well, it doesn't disturb us that much. Dissonance, it's okay. Dissonance, consonants, 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 consonants. Well, it's okay. It doesn't really bother us. It is necessary because the music has to move. Here without numbers. Dissonance, consonants, dissonance, consonants, dissonance, dissonance, consonants, 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 consonants. Here again. Consonants, 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 dissonance, consonants, 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 dissonance, dissonance. And now, third species. Oh my God. 4 notes against 1. You see the number of square numbers, the amount of square numbers increases. More chances for dissonances, functional dissonances, to help us make music move. But these are allowed. They are called, again, they're the same, passing dissonances. Well, in Palestrina's case, well, the so-called style counterpoint, some were allowed, some were not allowed. In what has been called scholastic counterpoint, and in modern music schools, both types are taught, some rules differ. So the allowed dissonances are not exactly the same. Here I see a procedure, a sort of nota cambiata or girandoletta, some people call it, or maybe some colleagues will call it something else. Well, the fact that Palestrina had its own grammar and another counterpoint expert or teacher aiming at a counterpoint that would also serve romantic music, had different grammar, is one, it only proves that these are not inborn rules. These are grammatical rules. They really are inborn in the particular language that we are using. Let's see how it sounds. Dissonance, 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 dissonance. It sounds like normal music, but it does have dissonances. Here, we don't see any numbers. I'm not saying anything, but I heard some dissonances. Fourth species, oh, that's very interesting. Now this really creates maybe even more unrest, a more need of what I called resolution, relief, or release. Let's say these are notes, these are dissonances, they're not passing, they're not there to make music move, but to make music more music, make music speak. So one note is held, I held this note, you see, while another note is still there, it's already there. The upper note, this note, keeps singing while the lower note changes. And this is a dissonance. So by opening this dissonance, because this note passively is victim of this movement and becomes a dissonance, cleverly goes back, goes down to another note and resolves into a consonant. Okay? There was yellow light. Cannot cross. Traffic light. Okay. Another yellow light. But these yellow lights, these moments of unrest, trigger an emotion. And it's so interesting that sometimes we really seek those notes. We want to have those notes. We enjoy having those notes, and performers learn how to play those notes. Fourth species of counterpoint. Dissonance? And now, fifth species, that is a mixture of all species, or should we say, rather, because we've been doing, really, that was inverse science. Should we say that the species are the breakdown of counterpoint? So fifth species is really counterpoint, but with the rules assigned by the particular grammar, because when we speak about species counterpoint, we're really speaking about exercises. So these are an abstraction. When we heard Palestina, but also Palestina had its own, at the beginning at least, its own structure. The entrance of a voice rather slowly, the entrance of a second voice rather slowly, the development. So how does it sound? How many dissonances? It's interesting to see that the dissonances differ according to the type of species they represent. Suspension, passing, and there was also so-called embellished resolution. Oh, finally, we hear something more interesting. So these dissonances are really not that bad. Of course, somebody like Palestrina manages to make music not boring, even though using dissonances without sparsely or without abusing, let's say. But he uses dissonances, giving us the illusion of perceiving music that does not have dissonances, and that's his mastery. So, one result of this style and the development of counterpoint is the master of masters, I call, that is really the quintessence of our Western language. So what we find here is what we have to study. Bach has not left us a Cartesian approach to the dissecting and the chopping up of procedures like Fuchs has done. I wish he had done it. But some very clever scholars have pulled this music apart as to give us some tools, at least trying to recreate this music. And we will see somebody has managed a hypothetical inverse science. So, but we also in Bach's style, there is not only one grammar, and we'll see two grammars that differ one another, because one is meant for people to sing music, and some therefore thing not only sound differently when they're sung, but also produce different types of efforts. And some intervals, some procedures, I want to use only technical terms, tend to be avoided. And that avoidance of procedure, of course, creates a side procedure that becomes grammar. So we forget the origin of that procedure as anti-procedure, as avoidance becomes grammar. And when the grammar is used by this master, becomes poetry, becomes beauty, perfection. We have nothing to say, even when he is wrong. That is, even when he goes against his own grammar, he knows what he's doing, and we appreciate it. Bach's vocal consonants and dissonances. Well, this style we call chorale, not just because it is for choir, it's just choral music, but because it's a specific style that provides the archetypical structure and layout of Western music. 4 voices is all we need to give an idea of Western harmony up to a certain point. Yes, there are dissonances. It's no Palestrina. There is an inner tension in drama that is quite different. It's typical of Bach. This is really absolute beauty. And there are many of these examples. There are hundreds of chorales that we have to study and learn and find those recurrent procedures to understand how Bach has written Bachian music and how his music has been influential on other composers. And now, Bach's instrumental consonants. Well, let's say here Bach is free to do something a bit more daring, perhaps. That becomes a grammar. That is, becomes a procedure, becomes okay. It has an inner logic. And here, how much tension we have. Can we say that this music is dissonant? Well, from a technical standpoint, it's full of dissonances, but it is not dissonant. It's music in perfect balance, in which everything leans towards a consonant. But this consonant is not satisfied with itself. It's never really final, but it is a consonant. For something not to be final, it needs really continuous unsettling. We have to turn to Wagner, and then to Strauss and the post-Wagnerians, and then to Schoenberg, before Schoenberg invented you know what. When consonants really, it's almost a state of horror vacui, we would say, the fear of emptiness, fear of stillness. We want to change, we want something new, we want unrest. Here we have total balance, but also lots of dissonances, a lot of dissonant notes. See, the loud, let's say, melody, upper melody, is, should we say, a song. In fact, it is a chorale that will give name to this procedure. This is not the typical four-part chorale that is it is really the vocabulary of Western music. This is a chorale prelude for organ. And what you hear in the background is an elaborate way of beautifying the music, adding a background that is no longer a background because it is full of interesting sounds thanks to these functional dissonances. How was this done? How could we recreate such a masterpiece if we were to break it down into smaller units? Let's see how we can produce such a masterwork, adding one layer on top of the other. Of course, we have to prioritize consonances. And then once we have a solid structure of consonances, we add those painful dissonances that could be of different types. So here we have just the bass. basically, it's so we say not it's boring, not so interesting piece of music. It's not really the piece of music, and this is inverse science because we should have begun with the actual melody. So what happens next? Level 1, consonant chords. Yes, I said we should begin with consonants. So here we go. At this point, consonant or consonant. All chords are consonant. This is a bit dissonant though. Yeah, and there was also okay, it was a bit more interesting. At least it was harmonized. It was a little interesting. Now we have, it's very interesting, suspensions. What this scholar is doing is really speaking from the perspective of the Italian school of partimenti, that is harmonizing a bass. So it's really inverse science. We're not starting from a chorale melody. The chorale tune that would have given the choral tune would have given name to the chorales, these compositions that are for 4 parts. And these are really archetypical masterworks, like the vocabulary and the syllabus for the Western harmony. And when we hear music in chorale style, we recognize it, but we'll speak about this in another lecture. So what is the next step? Adding passing note now. Passing notes. It's more dissonant. That was rather dissonant. More dissonances, but passing dissonances. Okay, what happens next? Add imitation. Oh, that's interesting. So let's see. Imitation. What is imitation? You see those stars? That's where a melody starts that imitates the other. Imitation. Imitation. Well, that's interesting. Let's see what's next. Aha, mastery. And guess what? This is the piece that Bach wrote, and we've already heard. Let's see what he says, what our teacher says.
As harmonized by Johann Sebastian Bach, he places the German chorale tune, a religious melody, in the soprano. It's called Ich ruf zu dir, Herr Jesu Christ, which means I cry out to thee, O Lord Jesus. Speaking of human suffering and the request for salvation. The alto is in continuous 16th notes and carries the load of indicating the harmonies, and the bass you already know.
We've heard it played on an actual organ. This is just sampled sound. and still sounds beautiful. See how many you should now perceive dissonances that are again functional dissonances, functional dissonances within something that does not mean to be dissonant. But when it does want to be dissonant, we have this unrest, this crash, that it really means to be dissonant. Well, that's one of the most famous dissonances in the history of music. And it is functional to creating really a shock. Yes, it has its resolution, but it's really a crash. It is really a shock, a dissonance that is really a dissonance, wanting to be itself, not subdued to a consonance. And now, possibly the most famous chord, it's not a chord, it's a progression of the 19th century, just because people are still debating on it, how to interpret it, what does it mean. Again, now with this chord, so we say the dissonance starts to have its own right of vote. It's no longer subdued, not yet totally free, but it's on its way. And we should not call it dissonance when all notes really are just in the same relation to each other. None other than each other. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? What is this? What's happening here? What is the dissonant? Consonant. Oh, does it resolve? Yes, it is better. I sensed there's a release. Let's say the end is the most consonant part, although it's theoretically dissonant because it is a dominant seven, but to our ears is a more consonant dissonance. My good friend and colleague, Albert Franz, equally skilled as piano virtuoso and lecturer, got it absolutely right. When he's quoting a well-known singer saying, "It feels so good to hurt so bad." I invite you to listen excerpts from this TEDx Salzburg lecture and how he explained to us, praised to us, what a dissonance is and why we want it. We want dissonances in music.
It feels so good to hurt so bad. What is this paradox? The answer lies in consonance and dissonance. Virtually all Western music speaks the same language. This language is called tonality. This is why we can talk of different genres of music in the same breath. They all speak the same language. As in life, musical dissonance is tension, and it inherently seeks resolution to consonance. Dissonance and consonance are music's equivalents to pain and pleasure. The great irony is that music is beautiful and hence pleasurable because it's painful. It's the dissonances that pull at our heartstrings, that give us goosebumps and move us to tears. There's a story that Mozart's father would wake him up in the morning by playing a scale, all but the last note. And then little Mozart would rush out of bed and have to resolve this dissonance. I don't know if it's true. It's probably apocryphal, but it's the story that goes around.
Of course, here Albert is speaking about a horizontal dissonance because we have in mind a progression we call scale. Well, whether or not you have been practicing scales or learning scales as musical alphabet, certainly, what would you expect? This. And see, that's what we're getting at. Where we want to, what we want to achieve, where we want to arrive, what we want to achieve. Peace, resolution, resolve, a full stop, perhaps, or a comma, but the dissonance has this power until it becomes itself consonant. Again, Albert cleverly now gives us something to think about. How do we deal with dissonances? How can we live without dissonances? Don't leave home without dissonances. Piece by Mozart. Dissonance, consonants. You see, he plays the dissonance louder and consonants softer. Typical. Tension, release.
It starts simply enough with the notes C, E, and G. These form the C major triad, and since the piece is in C major, these tones are consonant. This is our musical home base, where the drama starts and the happy stability to which it needs to return. Now, most movies don't start with the sex scene. We need a little romance first.
Well,
now, what are these next notes in the melody? These are preparations for the next harmony. These are definitely dissonances, like the G sharp in the accompaniment. It's not even part of the C major scale. So these have got to go. Now, the preparations become suspensions, which are always dissonances, so these have to go too. Now, they arrive at the new harmony of A minor, and then the bass has a passing tone, which is also a dissonance, so that's out too. So,
cleansing of dissonances. Let's see what the result is.
We're left with this once we remove the dissonances.
No dissonances. Yeah, good job. No dissonances.
Now, the next two measures are fairly intricate.
Oh my God, a lot has to go here. What's he going to do now?
But once we eliminate the chromatic neighbor tones and the passing tones, we're left with just one new chord in measure 3.
Consonant. Okay.
Now, the beginning of measure 4 has the notes we need. C, E,
right,
and G, so this should be a consonant. Now remember, these are the notes to which we're trying to return. This is our starting point. And now we have all of those notes. But listen. Now, we're not satisfied because the music is still unresolved. Mozart is playing a trick on us. Music theorists call this a cadential 6/4, but don't worry about that. We have all of the right notes for the home key, but they're out of order, and the C and E are actually dissonances on the way to a new chord. So once we've eliminated the dissonances, we're left with this. We can reduce this still further to these 4 chords.
Further? Yes. Consonant chords? Yes.
But wait, all of the other chords, except for C major, are dissonances in this context. So we're really just left with this.
Because they are unrest. So that's it. Okay, we have it. Thank you, Albert, for cleansing the music of these dissonances. We can be in peace now. He spoke about consonants and cadence. Here's a typical cadence. 4 chords. Well, in this case, we're not going to cleanse it any further because, as I said in another lecture, we are home. We move away from home, perhaps from the backyard. Then we want to return home from the front yard, or depending on what we prefer, of course, could be just the opposite. Okay, now this chord called the dominant precedes the home chord. And we are at home. So how do we learn to recognize these harmonies? Well, there are exercises, but there is really learning music, studying music, listening to music. But now, if those are consonances, and we were to play this, does it sound dissonant to you? A piece like this in which beauty is really expressed in a sublime manner, can we say that it is dissonant? I could skip a random and we find only dissonances that sound consonant. I go no further. If I move at random, this piece, I find only beauty. As if each consonant had a dissonance and each dissonance were really consonant. It's really extraordinary. So consonants, here we go again. Even glissandro, it's full of dissonances. These are dissonant chords, but sound consonant. That's the mastery of the composer. But in a piece like this, the Gibet, is the theme dissonant? Well, the theme, to begin with, and playing, this is really a dissonant chord. But in the context, it sounds okay. It's all dissonant, but consonant. Oh. Technically, these are dissonances. They sound consonant. Because Ravel has not only branded a style, he has invented his own grammar. And that's what has pushed music towards modernism, towards experimentations, even in this piece, by Scriabin. Scriabin being Scriabin, we can detect contrasts, more dissonant and less dissonant or more consonant sections. Certainly dissonant, but now, what happens? Is this dissonant? Is this invocation dissonant? Yes, technically it is. But within the context, this is perhaps more dissonant because he uses those so-called passing tones that want to be dissonant. Well, here, dissonance is getting freer and freer. Oh my God. It's so dissonant, but solidly dissonant, so much so that we find our own consonants in it. I told you that so-called Tristan chord would have created this. Oh, that was really a very influential chord. Okay, let's go back to the consonant cadence. See, we have gone somewhat astray. And now, oh, this piece. This is really one of the very first, if not attempts of, oh, totally. Now, when consonances do not exist, can we say that dissonances exist? Dissonances exist if we're hoping to hear consonants. This has its own consonances that are, we should say, cultural, grammatical, intellectual, cognitive consonances, suggested or inferred by processes that one learns, masters, or gets acquainted with. 12-tone music. Let's go back to our pure consonance cadence. So we've gone even further astray. And now, let's hear this. Chopin dissonant. Oh yeah, Chopin's chromatic. Chopin has lots of different dissonances. We need those for Chopin's music to sound so beautiful, and no one would doubt that Chopin's music is beautiful. Come on. Listen to this mazurka. These passing dissonances. Well, let's say Chopin was now working in a nightclub 100 years later, making a living as a pianist in a nightclub, playing his mazurka in a more jazz style. Great Bruce Adolph has very ingeniously done this. He has manipulated the mazurka and recreated it transformed it into a jazzurka, keeping the original sense of consonants and dissonance. Although using those so-called dissonances that in jazz are really those jazz consonances. Now those are important. They're no longer dissonances. They're not even freed dissonances, they're just consonances because they provide color to the music. Let's hear what the result is. It's beauty and color in a more jazzy setting. We have here the new consonances. Well, again, let's go back to our consonant cadence. In this case, perhaps we have not moved astray so much, because both Chopin and Chopin's avatar, Bruce Adolph, in this case, Bruce Adolph is a great multifaceted composer. Well, they both respect the fundamental functions of the consonant cadence. Let's see what's next now. Oh, ballad number 1. What happens here? Well, there's a dissonance. Some people wonder if it's really by Chopin. Chopin corrected the dissonance. Did he want that dissonance? This dissonance, does it sound good or not? I'll tell you when it comes, so probably you will recognize it. Okay, it's all unison now. That's an appoggiatura. Okay, that's 5th degree. Here we go. Oops, dissonance. Because this comes next. So you see, that's a really functional, beautiful Chopinian dissonance. It was necessary. And in fact, these dissonances can have a very powerful, expressive meaning. Bellini, Casta Diva. These dissonances really make the music very interesting, very expressive. Dissonance, consonants. Dissonance, consonants. Okay, let's see what Chopin does. Same piece, basically. Consonant, dissonance, consonants. Dissonance, consonants. See, these dissonances become really like syllables, accented syllables that need that stress, that stress in order to give the word that meaning, but in the case of music, in order to create an unrest that needs a resolution. This is the queen of dissonances, the appoggiatura, and we've heard that in Bellini and Chopin. Look, we have 3 notes that sound dissonant, and now the consonants. Appoggiatura, how can we translate appoggiatura? I lean on something. So that moment of dissonance, of crisis, is followed by relief. This is a delayed gratification, suspension. You see? This high note is suspended, lasts a little too long, but then it finds its resolution. Oh, this is very interesting, the cadenza doppia. Let's see how it works. You could not have a cadenza doppia, so-called cadenza doppia.
To achieve the basic variants of a cadenza doppia, one may vary the tenorizans clause and leave the cantizans and bassizans as they are. This is how it sounds without any movement in the tenorizans.
It is a suspension, don't you recognize it?
In the most common variant, the tenorizans moves together with the cantizans, ascending to the 6th, and then descending back to the 5th.
Oh, more dissonant. So in other words, I invite you to watch this tutorial. The more we complicate things, the happier we are when we achieve our restful, peaceful state. And it was Nietzsche who said, or Nietzsche, shall I say, Nietzsche, philosopher, he would wish to his worst enemies a life without difficulties. Because without difficulties, dissonances, one cannot really enjoy and fully understand what happiness is. And also the so-called flow state, a state in which, We walk, but when we walk, we have to make a little effort at walking. So we are in control, and we are also in between control and arousal, but the opposite. If there were no effort at all, if we were just lying idle, it would be called apathy. Of course, too much challenge turns arousal into anxiety, and we don't want that. Too much control, there is no stimuli whatsoever, no challenge whatsoever, but some control, it's relaxation, but then it turns into boredom, and when there is nothing else, apathy. This is really a quintessential principle, well expressed in positive psychology. Csikszentmihalyi, it's very different to pronounce it. Csikszentmihalyi, Hungarian scholar. It is very important to know that we need a little challenge to make things work. And here the challenge that George Wedge and his very important, very useful handbook on your training is, when we play each exercise several times, we have to determine if the chords are active or at rest. Rest. Active, rest. Rest. Active, active, rest. Oh, there are lots of those. Active, rest. Active, active, and now rest. We should train our sensitivity to recognize active and rest chords. Active, rest, rest, active, active, rest. Rest, active, rest, active, active, rest. Active, active. Now you say it. Active is dominant, rest is tonic. Okay, these are sonant cadences. Are they consonant or dissonant? Well, if I do this, I do pretty much what we've heard. Tonic, dominant, tonic. There are no dissonances. No dissonances. If anything, I can complicate it a little bit. Passing, so-called passing dissonance, form. Or suspension, so-called galant cadence. The only dissonance, because there is no seventh. See how I play it? Diminuendo, pensato on the resolution. And then I choose a sonority that is really my return home. But I said the sense of consonance and dissonance can also be culturally induced. Grammar, understanding, style, we have a lecture on style, The next lesson will be on style. And also style determines how we perceive dissonance and consonants. And perhaps it is the most recognizable factor of style, what we call a consonant. And a dissonance, especially the role that we assign to these two elements of musical composition. So let's watch this most interesting tutorial example on how to harmonize three notes. And you tell me if it's done with consonances or dissonances, or how many consonances, how many dissonances, or if it sounds dissonant, it sounds ugly, beautiful, painful, or just really beautiful. Because these dissonances are no longer dissonant, are just color. You see? Because dissonant rather consonant, strange. There's a little mistake here, theoretically. Not telling you. And now, finally, I am home. Well, here these dissonances are somehow functional. We did not harmonize this melody, but rather yes, something a little bit more elaborate than that. Let's see now. Three notes. Three notes, you see. To my home. Well, only one note was dissonant, beautifully dissonant. To my home. Oops. Retard, suspend. Oh, a note that comes. To my home. Only one dissonant. To oh my God. All dissonant. To my home. But I give up. They're all dissonant. To my home. 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 Well, it all sounded good to me. It all sounded consonant. So when we've learned to give to a consonant or dissonance its role, we have learned something about a style, which will be the subject of our next lecture. And we recognize that we can have chords whose dissonances lead us to a consonant or to a rest. Then we can answer the call. Please switch off all mobile phones during concerts. Thank you. I'll see you soon. Next time, musical style. Is it any historical matter or taste? Thank you.